I'm Peter Mansbridge. Jean Chrétien and George Bush talk about a new campaign against Iraq. We'll have the story coming up next on The National.
You don't need occasional heartburn caused by acid reflux. You don't need the scorching pain in your chest and throat. So before you see a doctor, get Gaviscon. Gaviscon tablets feel different. They become smooth and creamy on the way down. Then Gaviscon forms a soothing, protective barrier that helps keep acid down. Nobody needs the pain. Get Gaviscon, non-prescription relief from acid reflux.
I will follow through.
I will tell you the truth.
I will be fair in the way I serve you.
I will treat you the way that I like to be treated.
I will listen.
I will go out of my way to help you.
I will value your money as much as my own.
I will not drop the ball.
I will keep my promises.
I will be here when you need me.
I give you my word.
I give you my word.
I give you my word.
We give you our word.
Keeping our word is standard. Standard life. Speak to your financial security advisor today.
Pay gym membership, $55. Pay cable and phone bill, $83. Pay newspaper, internet, electric, gas, renters, and book club, DVD club, train pass, $220. Not needing a reminder for monthly bills? Priceless. Set up automatic payment of your monthly bills. Learn how at mastercard.ca. There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard.
The new KFC Clubhouse Twister. 2 crispy strips, bacon, real shredded cheddar, lettuce, and tomatoes, all rolled up in a warm tortilla. Now with the free 20-ounce Pepsi. KFC, it's finger-licking good.
New Stuffed Crust Gold is here. It's a golden ring of crunchy cheddar cheese baked onto Pizza Hut's delicious Stuffed Crust pizza. So cheese lovers, get it before it's gone.
Pizza Hut. Ah, finally some peace.
Hard day?
Oh, yes.
Oh, let's get some sleep.
Excuse me. Can I help you two?
Oh, no, thanks. We're fine.
People are getting here early, real early, for this year's Leon's Cross-Canada Inventory Clearance. We're clearing out over $100 million of inventory and passing all the savings on to you. The savings are so big you'll want to stay a while, but please, no sleepovers.
Do you think we'll get breakfast in bed?
That might be pushing it.
I'm running late. Start without me.
Squeeze.
Oh.
Limited flexibility.
Taking care of you, Mary? Diagnosis.
Inflammation pain. Arthritis inflammation pain.
Exactly. Solution?
Targeted pain relief.
Aspirin. Aspirin relieves the burning pain of arthritis inflammation right at the site. Sounds good, Jack. Keep it up. So we know that aspirin relieves everyday arthritis pain. Anything else?
Aspirin is also doctor recommended for supervised daily preventative therapy.
Available coated. Ask your doctor if aspirin is right for you.
Tonight, Jean Chrétien, George Bush, and Iraq.
Then I listened to his position.
But is the Prime Minister convinced? New Al-Qaeda tape. Pictures of the hijackers plotting their attacks. Warlord against warlord.
He is very egocentric.
Why some people in Afghanistan say things were better under the Taliban. And state of mind.
The tone is one more of recovery and resumption of life.
The results of a new CBC poll. In the wake of September 11th, how have Canadians changed?
People have tremendous resilience.
A special report from senior correspondent Brian Stewart.
The National. From the Canadian Broadcasting Centre, here is Peter Mansbridge.
Good evening. The Prime Minister heard it directly from the President today, the American case for an attack on Iraq. George Bush laid out some of it for Jean Chrétien during a private meeting in Detroit. In turn, Chrétien made his case, urging the U.S. to go through the UN before taking military action against Baghdad. Starting off our coverage on this story tonight, Paul Hunter.
Side by side in Michigan, they came to talk publicly about border issues. But privately, the question for Prime Minister Chrétien and U.S. President Bush, do they stand shoulder to shoulder on the matter of Iraq?
we realized, at least in our country, that we've become a battlefield. And we've got to confront those threats. We have no choice but to confront the threats head on.
Bush is campaigning for international support to attack and oust this man, Iraq's Saddam Hussein, accused by Bush of stockpiling weapons of mass destruction. Britain is on side, but so far, no other powers. And so, before they went on stage, Chrétien sat alone behind closed doors with Bush for 45 minutes, talking about largely one thing, Iraq. Neither even mentioned the word in their speeches, but like Bush, Chrétien spoke of the stand that must be taken against terror.
Our people will never consent to live life looking over their shoulders in fear.
Of course, that's been the language of many politicians since September 11th. But on Iraq specifically, Chrétien has been unwilling to jump. Before he supports the Bush position, he said he needs proof Saddam Hussein can be linked to terrorism. Later, back in Canada, he told reporters he didn't get that proof from Bush.
He did not come with the documents to present to me.
Canada has also maintained the push should be to have weapons inspectors allowed back in Iraq to see if there's indeed an imminent threat. And, says Chrétien, he told Bush the best way to deal with Iraq anyway is through the United Nations. The message Chrétien heard back from all of that. Bush will have more to say on this soon.
He listened to my position, I listened to his position, and he said to me that he will make a very important speech at the United Nations on Thursday, and that we will discuss later on.
So in the end, Chrétien didn't press for proof and didn't get any. Bush didn't press for support and didn't get any. In a way, the hard decisions for both leaders were put off by that promise of a tough speech by Bush later in the week, something Chrétien is evidently willing to wait for. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Windsor, Ontario.
In fact, a lot of people are waiting for that speech, a key moment in Bush's campaign for support. As for Iraq, it had its own message to get out today. With that and more, here's David Holton.
It was hardly an impressive display of Iraqi military strength. A few soldiers shooting off guns, others on a training assault course. But foreign reporters were brought in to watch the exercise, part of an Iraqi effort to send a message of defiance to the U.S.
If we don't have weapons, we shall fight with the sticks of palm trees. We shall fight with knives. We shall fight with our hands, but we shall never allow these colonialists, these invaders, to occupy our country.
Reporters were also escorted to a site where the U.S. has accused Iraq of developing nuclear weapons. The Iraqis say the site was destroyed during the Gulf War, and that new buildings here are only used for civilian purposes. On hand at the site was an unlikely ally, Scott Ritter, a former UN weapons inspector who says there's no justification for U.S. military action against Saddam Hussein.
If the United States does this, not only will forever tip the balance of world opinion against the United States, especially in critical regions such as the Islamic world or the Middle East, but it'll also give the green light for China to attack Taiwan, for India to attack Pakistan, for North Korea to attack South Korea. Basically, it'll turn the world into the Wild West, where everybody reaches for their six-shooter first and asks questions later.
But Washington's arguments get a boost in a new report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies. The report says Iraq could build a nuclear bomb within a year if, and it's a big if, it could acquire enriched uranium from another country.
It's a very serious problem that has to be dealt with great urgency. And from that point of view, I think both the British and American administrations are absolutely right.
But UN Secretary General Kofi Annan worries about the consequences of attacking Iraq.
What sort of Iraq do we wake up to after the bombing? And what happens in the region?
Still, U.S. officials are encouraged by what they say is growing international support for a tougher stand towards Saddam. In his speech at the UN on Thursday, Bush is expected to propose the return of UN arms inspectors to Iraq, backed up by the threat of force at the first sign that the Iraqis are not cooperating. David Holton, CBC News, Washington.
The Arab television station Al Jazeera has broadcast an intriguing new video. The station says it was made by Al-Qaeda and shows 4 hijackers preparing for the attacks last September. Al Jazeera says the men are seen studying flight manuals and maps of U.S. landmarks. The station says Osama bin Laden's voice can also be heard praising the hijackers. Al Jazeera speculates the tape was made in Kandahar, but it did not say when it was recorded or how it was obtained. Al Jazeera has broadcast Al-Qaeda videos in the past. And another note about Al Jazeera, one of its journalists says he interviewed 2 senior Al-Qaeda operatives, and they reportedly told him the initial targets last year were the U.S. Congress and nuclear power plants. While security at the border was part of what George Bush and Jean Chrétien talked about today, security at Canada's ports was the topic of discussion for other people at a meeting in Halifax. Here's Laurie Graham on that.
Getting in and out of the port of Halifax can be as easy as climbing a fence. What's worse, these teenagers got in after security was breached at another terminal and the security firm was fired.
If a breach occurs, it has to be addressed and dealt with.
For Canada, port security is a huge concern. 500,000 containers make their way through Halifax every year. Montreal is even busier, 1 million containers a year. The same in Vancouver. And since September 11th, people want to know every detail of each container's journey.
Where's it ending up? Where's it been in between? Who's touched it? Who's had access to it?
Questions being asked at a conference in Halifax.
We have to do exactly what the U.S. are doing. They will not tolerate that Canada be a weak link.
And so, since September 11th, Ottawa has invested millions in securing Canada's ports, hiring new inspectors, buying high-tech surveillance equipment, all to spot suspicious containers.
That makes sense to you? No.
Now, Canadian and American customs agents work together, sharing intelligence, trying to outsmart potential terrorists. But even after all those changes, only a small number, 3% of all the containers passing through Canada's ports are searched, leaving most untouched.
It's not so much how many we look at that's important, is are we looking at the right ones?
Some port police aren't so sure.
We really don't have the kind of resources that the Americans have. They have a very strong customs system, for example. They have a very strong Coast Guard system. And I don't think that Canada can really match that kind of thing.
Add to that, a recent Senate report says organized crime has infiltrated Canada's ports, causing police to worry that criminals will cozy up to terrorists.
You cannot dissociate organized crime and terrorists, because if you have organized crime operating in an environment, organized crime, their main objective is profit at all costs.
Port authorities and Ottawa agree more needs to be done to improve security. The question is, who pays? Laurie Graham, CBC News, Halifax.
There was another report today about security in Canada, one that's been heard before. A defense lobby group says the country's military is in desperate need of more money and can't be depended upon to protect Canadians. Eric Sorensen has the details.
Should Canada participate in a military attack on Iraq? Even as another Canadian frigate shipped out today for the Arabian Sea, a new report suggests that question may be pointless. A defense lobby group says Canada's military is simply not up to the task.
What can we contribute? Almost nothing.
These analysts have sounded the alarm before, but this time have issued a dire warning that Canada's military is on the verge of breakdown.
We've all been moved to act by the sense that the Canadian forces are in crisis and literally on the verge of collapse.
This is what the defense group says Ottawa must do. Put another $1.5 billion into the military immediately to replace aging equipment, to boost the number of troops, and increase Canada's international stature. The military itself wouldn't comment, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs did.
Every military in the world must continue to be strengthened, brought up to date, modernized, these things, and this the government looks at very seriously. But to suggest that it's at a state of collapse, I think, is irresponsible.
Still, the government is under pressure, and not just from the usual critics.
There is reason to believe that we're not pulling our weight.
Some Liberals are speaking out.
I think it's incumbent upon members of Parliament, senators who are concerned about the issue of defense spending to speak up.
Even the NDP backs more military spending.
That more resources need to go into the military. It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're at.
That's an obvious fact.
But the Minister of Finance suggests there isn't a lot of money available, and not just for the military.
You know, there are a lot of pressures, and Canadians are interested in what Mr. Romano is going to say about health care, and they're interested about issues related to the environment and the implementation of Kyoto. So, of course, there are competing pressures.
The Council for Canadian Security says for all its shortcomings, the Canadian military, in particular the Navy, could play a helpful role in a military attack on Iraq. And the group says if Canada wants to maximize its influence with the United States, it should consider supporting the U.S. sooner rather than later. Eric Sorensen, CBC News, Ottawa.
Still ahead tonight, exciting find.
But there's likely enough methane and natural gas out there to satisfy energy reserves in Canada for about 40 years.
It could be the biggest deposit of natural gas ever found in Canada. But can it be used? And state of mind.
Canadians definitely feel warmer and more connected with Americans today.
The people and the poll. We ask Canadians what's changed since September 11th. Muslim and Arab Canadians spoke out today about how life has changed for them since September 11th. It has not changed for the better. They say they feel more disliked, mistrusted, and misunderstood than ever before. And as the CBC's Raj Ahluwalia reports, 2 new polls back them up.
A typical house in a typical suburb near Toronto. Their lifestyle, their home, say the Husseins, no different than any of their neighbors.
I just hope that people don't get totally the wrong idea about Muslims, because we're just normal people. We have a different religion, that's all.
For some Muslims in Canada, though, these are difficult times. During the past year, they've been targeted, blamed by some for what happened last September. A new poll for the CBC found many Canadians, 37%, have more negative feelings about Muslims now than a year ago. Muslim groups say they're disappointed, but not surprised.
Our research is saying that the Canadians are not more tolerant, than the Americans.
The poll also asked about the controversial practice of racial profiling. Last September, 50% agreed it would be acceptable for authorities to single out individuals of Arabic origin. A year later, it's barely changed, 48%.
Multiculturalism is down the drain, if you ask me, in this country.
Findings mirrored in another survey released today, this one by the Canadian Arab Federation.
On a day-to-day basis, you feel that alienation, you feel that marginalization.
Many of Canada's million or so Muslims say they can relate to that, and they say it's especially bad for women.
I've been called a terrorist. I've been told to go back home. And before September 11th, it was a matter of people staring, which you somewhat get used to, not quite, but now it's verbal abuse, racial slurs.
Some blame Ottawa, saying its anti-terrorism legislation legalizes discrimination against Muslims.
We're politically insignificant in this country. We can lobby all we want. We'll lobby our brains out. Nothing's going to change.
But, says Dadir Hussein, Muslims can play a role in changing their image in Canada.
We were not telling our Canadian friends. So it's somewhat our fault that we were keeping it to ourselves. And post-September 11th, now it has come out.
He hopes over time it will all change, and with it, so will Canadian attitudes about Muslims. Raj Ahluwalia, CBC News, Oakville, Ontario.
With international attention focused on Iraq right now, many people are worried that Afghanistan is suffering from a dangerous form of neglect, and they point to a new battleground as proof. Yesterday, 2 warlords began fighting for the city of Khost. Today, both refused to back down. And that's raising concerns not only about the city, but the rest of the country as well. The CBC's Patrick Brown traveled to Khost.
Presidential envoy Shahzadah Massoud is a man with a mission. This is Khost in Afghanistan's wild east, where there's a struggle for the power, profit and prestige that comes with the job of provincial governor. Massoud's mission is to get President Karzai's appointee in and a local warlord out. There are not two governors, he says. There's just one governor. His name is Hakim Taniwal, and he was appointed by the president. Local strongman Bashakan Zadran rejects the president's choice. He says he and his brothers should run all three provinces in the region. Hakim Taniwal isn't the governor, he says. I don't accept him and the people don't accept him. Heavily armed convoys race back and forth in a confrontation that has already cost dozens of lives. Bachakan Zadran is a greedy warlord, says Hakim Taniwal, the governor appointed by President Karzai.
He has one love for money. So he is very egocentric. And I am a selfless man. Only one desire to work for the people.
President Hamid Karzai's government is firmly in control in Kabul. But outside the capital, the real masters of this country are warlords, great and small. Even those local strongmen who say they support Karzai often run their areas as independent principalities. If that doesn't change, says Europe's special representative, Afghanistan will relive the 1990s when warlords tore the country apart.
When finally the people are so exhausted from the exactions and the insecurity that they had, that many of them welcomed the Taliban. So there would be a danger then of a reversion to something of that kind.
In Khost, where gunmen roam the markets, some residents are already saying things were better under the Taliban. Under the Taliban, there was peace and security, he says. Now, warlords and kidnapping are back. The showdown between the government and the warlords is far from over. When they're not fighting, the two sides meet at the mosque during prayers and keep their guns close to hand. Patrick Brown, CBC News, Khost.
A passenger train in eastern India derailed and plunged into a river tonight. Police say at least 100 people are feared dead. The train was heading from Calcutta to New Delhi. Montreal's Concordia University has a history of student protests, and that was in evidence today. It was over a scheduled speech by former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Protesters blocked off the university building where Netanyahu was to speak, and it sparked a violent confrontation with riot police. Matthew Pace has more.
They came here to spread their message, that Israel should stop occupying Palestinian territory and to silence someone else's. It was a warning for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Get out of here! We are not welcome here!
One-time Prime Minister of Israel promised he'd deliver his message, even when he was told what was awaiting him.
They're not going to stop that. You know damn well they're not going to stop. Can I use that language? You know damn well they're not going to stop me or anyone else from speaking.
But many tried, and police responded. Students who had come to hear Netanyahu waited. His speech was delayed several times. Then,
at the request of both Mr. Netanyahu's own security and the police, he will not come here for the lecture.
The cancellation of Netanyahu's speech left those who had come to hear it outraged.
Why can't we listen to a speaker speak? It's ridiculous.
This is an insult to all Canadians that the freedom of speech has been denied to another human being, and this is not the Canadian way.
Coercive riot to prevent...
Speaking to reporters afterwards, Netanyahu said he too was disappointed something like this could happen in Canada.
It is not a protest, it is a violent riot, and democracies have to be vigilant against violent riots.
Netanyahu is supposed to speak to another group tomorrow in Toronto. Protesters say they'll be there too. Matthew Pace, CBC News, Montreal.
Fairly quiet day on the stock markets, but there was a surge in gold prices, partly because of the heightened tensions over Iraq. Doctors say Gordon Lightfoot had a close call this weekend. The Canadian singer remains in the intensive care unit of a Hamilton hospital where he's recovering from abdominal surgery yesterday. The surgeon who operated on Lightfoot says he has a rare condition that weakens the blood vessels in the abdomen, and he says that Lightfoot's good health helped him survive. A Calgary woman who left her children to die while she was out drinking was sentenced today to 8 years in prison. Ree Fuji went out of town with her new boyfriend last June and left her 15-month-old son and 3-month-old daughter alone for 10 days. They starved to death. Fuji pleaded guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter. Scientists have made an unusual discovery in the deep sea off the coast of British Columbia, a huge field of frozen rocks, mini glaciers buried on the ocean floor, and inside the ice, potential fire, possibly the biggest discovery of natural gas and methane in Canadian history. But as Melissa Fung explains, it may never see the light of day.
Buried on the floor of the Pacific Ocean for thousands of years, a potential bonanza. Frozen deposits or hydrates of natural gas and methane, possibly equal in size to all the gas reserves in the country.
There's likely enough methane and natural gas out there in the hydrates to satisfy energy reserves in Canada for about 40 years.
The deposits were first found 2 years ago in the net of a fishing boat. Last month, researchers went to the site, about 120 kilometers west of Vancouver Island. They say the deposits could go as far down as 850 meters below the ocean floor. The technology doesn't exist yet to mine the energy, but there are already claims on it. The provincial government is planning to lift a moratorium on offshore oil and gas exploration.
There is an enormous prize there that every British Columbian can benefit from. We have to make sure we're applying good, sound science, and if we can, and we can protect the environment, we'll be moving forward.
But First Nations groups say not before they're consulted. They say they have a right to natural resources.
Both levels of government have to implement legislation and policies that reflect the decisions so that our economic interests are accommodated.
Some environmental groups say it's ironic that at a time when the federal government is touting the Kyoto Accord, resources will be spent on trying to extract energy from fossil fuels.
This kind of research money would be better spent on conservation, on energy efficiency, and on renewables, because that's what we have to do to get to our Kyoto target over the next 10 years and to get to the major reductions in harmful gases.
Harmful gases like methane, which is released when natural gas is extracted from hydrates. So until scientists can find another way, the bonanza beneath the ocean will remain a buried treasure. Melissa Fung, CBC News, Vancouver.
More now on that new poll we told you about a few moments ago. The mood of the country in the wake of September 11th. The poll, conducted for CBC News, Radio-Canada, and the Toronto Star, asked Canadians what's changed since the attack. How do they feel about life, their security, and our relationship with the United States? The results may surprise you. Here's senior correspondent Brian Stewart with Canada's State of Mind.
Reminders, always the reminders of September 11th. They surround our lives in bookstores and throughout the media, and in our own flashbacks. We knew back then we'd never forget. In the immediate aftermath, most Canadians, 85%, believe this unimaginable, traumatic horror would deeply and permanently change their lives. Ahead lay a nervous future and painful scars.
People certainly spoke about a sense of being numb, and that making decisions about mundane aspects of life seemed to be not very important. People talked about having difficulty making major life decisions.
Dr. Cheryl Reguer is one of Canada's leading trauma specialists.
In particular, people talked about avoiding large crowd situations because the sense that if I'm somewhere where there are thousands of other people, surely that is a greater target than if I'm somewhere that's more isolated.
A year later, however, we've started to turn the page and move on. The big surprise is just how resilient we are. Our poll shows only a slim majority, 54%, now believe September the 11th profoundly changed the world in a permanent fashion. 44% actually feels the world will be much the same despite the tragedy. Granted, most feel it's had some impact on the country and the need for security. But still, in personal terms, the shock waves have abated with passing months. 16% of us now feel the tragedy had a high impact on their own lives over the year. The majority, 59%, say just a moderate impact. In 1 in 4, 25%, feel September 11th had only a low impact. As the anniversary approaches, Canadian emotions tend to be of a quiet sort. The strongest emotion is one of sorrow and sadness. Fully 55% of women, 35% of men still feel some emotional pain. Surprisingly, the next strongest feeling, increased confidence and resolve, is felt by 34% of men, though only 21% of women. What we don't feel as much anymore is fear and anxiety. Only 14% of women and slightly fewer men felt nervous.
We'll have more findings in a moment, but it does seem we're in a state of relative calm that few would have predicted in the days following the fire and chaos of September 11th, or in the tense build-up to the Afghanistan operation. Even pollsters who've been closely watching our mood over the year say they didn't expect recovery would be so swift.
This was an awful sociological experiment that clearly nobody would ever want to repeat, but the results of it are quite, in some respects, very uplifting and encouraging.
Frank Graves is head of ECOS Research, which conducted this poll.
Although this certainly has had some major impacts, they're less dramatic than we would have thought, and that probably the tone is one more of recovery and resumption of life rather than some permanent disruption of the order of people's lives. So that's somewhat surprising.
People have tremendous resilience. That doesn't mean that a significant number of people don't have horrible effects after trauma, and that it doesn't have some impact on their life. But resilience is one of the factors that continues to come